What's up, everybody? It is Dankamyouknow. You know. And I am back with another video. And ladies and gentlemen, the case swap is officially done. So I'm going to show you today is the complete tutorial on how to swap out all of your Omen components into a new case. And then I'll also go over the results and my final thoughts. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get into it. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start off with the new case, and it is the Fractal Meshify Compact 2. And the really nice thing about it is basically every panel on it is removable. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with the side panels. Then I take off the top one. And then this front one swings out and then pops off also. So I'm just getting all of these out of the way to make the build much easier. And you guys know me, I'm the Noctua man. Dancam the Noctua man, as some call me. So I went ahead and went with all Noctua fans. And this case actually came with two 140mm fans. They're Fractal fans. I'm not sure if Fractal makes them or who makes them for them, but I wanted to use all Noctua fans, so I'm going to remove these two fans in the front, and then I'm also going to remove the fan on the rear. And this case supports quite a bit of fan options, but I'm basically going to run two 140mm fans in the front. I'm going to run two 140mm fans on the top. And then I'm also going to run a 120mm fan on the rear. So basically, I'm going to have two intake fans on the front. I'm going to have two exhaust fans on the top. And then I'm going to have an exhaust fan on the rear. So I'll have a little bit of negative pressure. But I want to go ahead and test it and kind of see how it is. And then if I need to, I can remove that panel that's right below the front fan right there. And I can mount a 120mm fan right where the hard drive cage goes. So I'm going to do some testing and kind of see what works best. But I'm pretty sure even with the two intakes and three exhausts, it'll run just fine. And then here I am mounting the two exhaust fans on the top. And they're both 140mm. And one thing that I should have done later, now that I've fully built the PC, is I should have mounted the majority of these fans later on after having the motherboard in. Because I actually had to rotate the front fans 180 degrees to be able to fit the cables in cleanly. So my best advice would be to leave the fans loose until you're getting close to the end. I got all of them screwed in. Now moving on to the rear 120mm fan. And then I think I'm just going to leave these in a save pile. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with these Fractal fans. I've heard they're actually okay from a lot of the reviews on the case I did, but I'm a Noctua guy, so I went with Noctua fans all around. So here I am screwing in all four corners. And then I also didn't plug in any of the fan extension cables to the fans. I just left them as is, and I wanted to wait until the motherboard was in to kind of see the best way to do the fan routing. So here we're looking at the little legend, I guess I'll call it, but it'll show you where you're going to put these standoffs for what kind of board you're using. So the HP Omen motherboard is a micro ATX. And you can see it has a letter designation for ATX and micro ATX. And so I'm going to have to move those standoffs that are on the bottom to the three that are right above it. And unfortunately, I didn't have a socket that fit, so I had to use a pair of pliers to get these standoffs off. And this is from the owner's manual for the Fractal Meshify, and it shows you where to move the standoff screws to. So you can see the 3 on the bottom just get moved up. I'm just going through and loosen all of them. And I'm not sure what size these standoffs are. It was a very, very small size, so unfortunately I couldn't tell you what size it is. So I'm going to go ahead and get these 3 tight in their new location. Now we are actually done with the Fractal case. Got it all ready. Now we're going to move on to the Omen. So first I'm going to go ahead and take off the side panel, remove the lower fan, and then I'm going to remove the screw that holds in the back panel. And if you haven't seen it already, I did a video on how to remove the back panel, and I'll go ahead and leave that linked above if you want to check that out. So now that we got that ready, we're going to start off with the GPU cable. Get that removed. We're going to remove the 2 screws at the rear. Then we're also going to remove the sag bracket screw at the front. And then we're going to move on to the hard drive cables. And then my Y-split cables for all my fans. And then once I get the GPU out, I'm going to go ahead and remove the motherboard 24 pin, the audio cable down there. And then we're going to pretty much separate all of the cables that are attached to the motherboard. And here I am just kind of pointing to each one individually. And we'll go over all of those when the time comes. But let's go ahead and get this going. So remove the GPU connections, the 2 screws at the rear. Go ahead and get the sag bracket out of there. And it's just 1 screw, and the sag bracket just pulls up and out. And the hard drive, you just grab the clips on the end and it slides right out. So I'm going to put that in a safe place because I'll be reusing that. And we're going to get the GPU out of there. And you basically just push down on the connection on the motherboard to loosen the graphics card. And there I just removed the 24 pin. And I'm removing all my fan extension cables and the Y-split cables. And there was the CPU power cable. And right there I cut out a zip tie that I used to secure the CPU cable. So now I'm basically just completely separating all of the power supply cables from the case. And then right there I removed this SATA cable that attaches to the RGB controller. So now that I've got all of the power supply cables separated from the Omen motherboard, I'm going to go ahead and remove these 4 screws, and we're going to go ahead and pull this power supply out. And once these 4 screws are removed, there's a clip towards the front of the power supply in the case, and you just push that down and the PSU slides forward a little bit and you pull it out. And I did a full tutorial on how to change out the power supply, and I'll go ahead and link that above if you want to check that out. So now we're going to remove the audio cable, and then I'm going to remove this SATA data cable. That's for my mechanical hard drive. And then we're going to remove the power button connection. We're going to remove the LED connection, the USB 3.0 header, and then also the light bar. And then I ended up not transferring over my Wi-Fi card, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and that's just held on with 1 screw. So you remove the screw, and then it just pops out of the motherboard connection. And I'm just going to leave that down below. And then there was the SATA data cable for the hard drive. And it was behind the case, so I kind of had to fish it out, because that's going to be going over to the new case. Then we're going to go ahead and get the USB 3.0 header, the power button, and the LED positive and negative. And we're just going to kind of push these to the side. So now we've got the motherboard completely separated from everything in the case. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the screws that hold the motherboard to the case. And there's 8 of them. And I'm pointing to each of them here. And actually right there, I switched to a magnetic tip screwdriver because basically every screw in these computers is super tiny. So having a magnetic screwdriver is super helpful because as soon as you're done unscrewing it, it'll just stick to the tip of the screwdriver. So it's much less likely that you're going to lose the screw. So I highly recommend using a magnetic tip screwdriver. And usually a Phillips head number 1 is your best bet. So now with the motherboard loose, I just separate it from the rear I/O shield and then just kind of pull up and out, and we're good to go. And one thing that's not going to get transferred is the RGB controller down there in the bottom right. And here I am just pointing to all the connectors that go with the motherboard case, the connections that go with the case that are not getting transferred over. And one thing to remember is the lettering on those, the power button and the LED positive and negative, you want the letters to be facing downward. That's pretty much holds true for any case. And here we're going to go ahead and remove the I/O shield. And with a little bit of force, it's going to go ahead and pop out. And then now we're actually done with the Omen case, and we're going to move on to the Meshify Compact and start getting everything transferred over. So first we're going to go ahead and pop in the I/O shield. And this was kind of a pain in the butt. It was a much tighter fit than I thought, and I actually took a good amount of force to get it to sit snug. So don't be worried if you can't get it first try. So now we're going to slide the motherboard in. And then you're basically going to align this little dowel pin that I have an arrow pointing to. And then once that's lined up, you should be good to go. The motherboard should be in place. But you may want to check your I/O shield in the back just to make sure it's all lined up and nothing looks funky. And here I am installing all the screws for the motherboard. So we can get this motherboard nice and tightened down. And I went ahead and used the screws that were supplied in the case. It came with a bunch of accessories, so I used the screws that were included with the case. So now we're going to go ahead and remove these 2 thumb screws for the back, and this basically gets bolted to the power supply and slides in with the power supply inward. So we get these 2 thumb screws out, and we're going to go ahead and use the screws that came with the case to screw in this little, I guess we'll call it a shield, a little bracket. And we get all 4 bolts secured to the bracket. And you just want to make sure they're a good hand tight. You don't have to make them super tight. And then on this case, you want the power supply fan facing downward. And then you're just going to slide the whole thing in there. And you'll notice that I left all cables connected to the power supply. It's much easier that way than trying to plug them in while the power supply is in the case. And I went ahead and removed the tray from the stock HP Omen hard drive. And then I'm going to mount it to the tray that came with the case. So there's the hard drive, and there's the hard drive cage for the fractal case. And it came with these little rubber grommets. So you put the grommet down and then you screw the screw in. So it's kind of like an anti-vibration grommet, like how Noctua fans have. So you get those all screwed in. And I went ahead and put the hard drive back in and tightened the thumb screw that holds it down. And I've got the SATA data cable plugged in with the power cable. There is my graphics card connection, the motherboard 24 pin. There is my CPU connection. So we got those all ready to go. And then this is a USB-C header, but unfortunately the Omen motherboard does not have one, so that's not going to get used until I get my new motherboard. And there is the USB 3.0 connection. Then I'm trying to fish them out right here, but here is our power, our LED positive and negative, and unfortunately the Omen motherboard does not have a reset switch, so that will not be used. And then there is the HD audio. So everything's basically the same as the Omen case, so it's really hard to get them mixed up. They only plug into one spot. And here I am routing the CPU cable up, because that's at the top left of the motherboard. In this case, comes with some nice little straps to keep it secure over there. So I'm basically routing everything upward, and there's the HD audio cable. And then I realized it was actually better to install the graphics card cable first, and then we're going to get our big 24 pin. And it's hard to see, but I'm installing it through a grommet on the bottom of the case. And then now I'm getting my HD audio cable going back up in there, and I'm tucking all my power supply cables in there. So I didn't realize it, but I was inserting them into the lower grommet, all my front panel connections, and I didn't realize that they were sitting so low, but you'll want to do them into the top grommet. So there's my HD audio. There is my PCIe for the graphics card. There's my 24 pin, and you can see the grommet that I put them through. And then there is where all the front panel connections should go through. I originally went through the bottom, but that didn't leave me enough room. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in the CPU fan up there and get all of these plugged in. So I go ahead and plug in the HD audio, and you'll see the pins on the HD audio. It only can get plugged in one way. So shouldn't be too difficult to get that in. Then right here I realized that the top rear fan is actually getting in the way of plugging in this CPU cable, so I go ahead and remove this fan to make it easier to get the CPU power supply cable in. And this is a brand new power supply, so the cables still are a bit stiff. But you can see me here messing with it, trying to get it as clean as possible. Making sure all the routing's good. So then right here I realized I had the data cable routed the wrong way. So I went ahead and flipped it and plugged it back in. And then there is the USB 3.0. And that only goes in one way. And then just keep in mind, you want the lettering for your power switch and your LED positive to be facing downward. And it's notated on the motherboard which one's positive and negative, so make sure you have those plugged in correctly. So I didn't really realize it until I had the motherboard in, but I didn't have enough fan headers to properly power all of these fans. So I actually had to use this 3-legged Y cable, and you can see the amperage rating that's on the fan right there. See, it says 0.13 amps. A single fan header can support up to 1 amp, so I decided to use that 3-legged Y cable to power the rear fan and the 2 top ones. Because I didn't realize this at first, and then I'll show you how I have them hooked up. So I have the 2 front fans Y split into the front fan header. I have the rear and 2 top fans, a 3-legged Y split into the system fan header, and then I have this CPU cooler fans hooked up to the CPU fan header. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove 2 slots to make way for the graphics card. And those panels just come out super easily. So I'm going to go ahead and line this up the best that I can and insert it into the slot and give it a nice little push down. You should hear a very satisfying click. And here I'm putting the thumb screws back in to secure the graphics card. Then I'll grab my screwdriver and tighten those down. And then I'm going to go ahead and plug in my PCIe cable to power the graphics card. So I get that all plugged in. The cabling looks all nice. And then now it's back on with the panels. Almost done. Alright, so we're all back together. I've got the power supply turned on. So let's go ahead and press the power button and hopefully this thing comes to life. And you're gonna have to keep in mind that I do not have any type of RGB. So it seems like it's working alright. And I'm gonna turn on and make sure all my fans are working. All fans are working. There's my home screen. Let me log in. Get my microphone out of the way. And we are up and running. We are up and running, boys. So let's go ahead and take a look at Ryzen Master, and it looks like my idle temps right now are in the low 30s. So this thing is actually sitting a little bit cooler than with the Omen case. The Omen case, I would get like mid to low 40s. So a couple degree difference. But let's go into profile 1 here. And then I'm going to run a stress test real quick. And then see what my temperatures look like then. So running my stress test. Oh, it's definitely running a little bit cooler. Before, I would usually sit around mid 60s, and this stress test is at around high 60s. I mean, excuse me, high 50s. So definitely a little bit cooler. And you can hear my fans ramp up a little bit. Yep, sitting in the low 60s. Nice. That is fantastic. And keep in mind, this is with a slight overvolt now. I'm actually at 1.35 volts. And each core is at 4.1 gigahertz. So overall, the machine is running great. And then back down to where it was idling before. Oh yeah. Well, that's going to do it for the swap, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. On the difficulty rating, I would say it's probably a 2 out of 5. And overall was a pretty easy process. If I wasn't filming, I would say it probably would have taken me about an hour to an hour and a half. But even with filming all angles and everything like that, it took me about 3 hours, which isn't bad at all. And I really enjoyed working in the new case because if you watched my last tutorial on swapping out the power supply, you know that managing all the cables in the Omen case was not easy. and it didn't look very clean when I was finished, and I just wasn't really happy with the result, even though it was completely functional. It was actually really nice to work in the Fractal case and managing all the cables with all of the little slots they give you and the channels, I guess I'll call them, they give you to route all the cables through. It was super nice, and it came out super clean, actually much cleaner than I thought. I was able to hide almost all cables, especially all the fan cables. So yeah, just an overall great experience working in this case. And just a few notes on the tutorial as well. I don't use Wi-Fi, and I actually have never used Wi-Fi on my Omen, so I unfortunately did not swap over the Wi-Fi card that comes with the Omen. So I apologize that this information is not in the tutorial, but I've used Ethernet since I've gotten the computer. And if you look behind me, you probably can't see it, but my modem is actually behind my garbage there on the ground, and I have an Ethernet cord going up to my computer, so I do not have a way to show you how to swap over the Wi-Fi card. So maybe I'll do that in the future, but I always use Ethernet, so I just actually left the Wi-Fi card in the Omen case. So when the time comes and I revive the Omen, I'll go ahead and get the Wi-Fi hooked up back in there. And then let's see if there's anything else I can think of about anything interesting with the swap. I did have to use a 3-legged Y-split cable because my front 2 fans are Y-split into the front fan header, and my CPU fans, CPU cooler fans are going into the CPU fan header. And then the rear fan and both top fans, I have those 3-way split into the system fan header. And luckily, Noctua fans draw very little amperage, and you'd have to be careful if you're going over 1 amp. You could possibly do damage to your motherboard, but all 3 of those fans, I think, barely hit 0.3 amps, 0.4 amps. So I was able to use the 3-legged Y-split cable, and it came out great. Everything worked out fantastic. And other than that, I think those were the only 2 things I kind of ran into that I wanted to go over. And as far as the results go, I did a stress test in Ryzen Master, which I showed you, and my stress tests before were about 65 Celsius on the CPU, and then on this stress test they were at about 59, so that's about a 6 degree difference, 6 degrees Celsius difference. And I also hopped into a game and I played a little bit of Modern Warfare, and I actually saw a 11 to 15 Celsius degree drop with my in-game temperatures. During the first 2 matches I played, I was sitting at about 49 degrees Celsius for my CPU, which is just absolutely insane because I used to idle at 55C with my stock Omen, so just a huge difference. And then even my GPU, while gaming, I used to sit between 62 to about 67 Celsius, and then when I was in game right now, I was at anywhere between 55 to around 59 degrees Celsius, so a good drop on the GPU too. And like I was saying in the video, I'm running 440 millimeter fans now and a 120 millimeter, so the airflow in the case is just, it's massive. And it's got an opening on the bottom, the front, and the top. So there's just so much airflow to be had, and it really shows just swapping from the Omen case to this. And I'm really excited with the results, and it came out looking super clean. And unfortunately, there's no RGB right now, but I do have something planned in the future, and I will come out with a video on that. And I won't say anything else because I kind of want it to be a surprise. And then other than that, I think that's about it. Nothing else I can really think of. But this swap came out fantastic, and I'm super duper, duper duper happy with the results. And once again, I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. And if you stuck around to the end, please be sure to give it a like rating and also subscribe if you are enjoying my content. And please be sure to keep an eye out for my motherboard tutorial, where I swap in an X570 motherboard, and that should be coming out within the next few weeks. And once again, I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching, and I appreciate all of your support, and I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you all have a great day.